Hi, my name's Stephen Demorest.
In the days of my youth, I was told what it means to be a man.
I went to Williams as an English major, had a general idea about writing, had no idea how to go about doing that because they taught you all about 17th century literary criticism, but they didn't tell you how the actual craft of getting a job and having an agent and being a working writer to make a living. They didn't teach you any of that stuff. My friend Ron Ross and I produced all the concerts at Williams for the Winter Carnival and the Fall Homecoming Weekend. We had Van Morrison and Little Feat and Poco, and had a double bill with Poco and the Small Faces. And a month before they came, the booker called up and said, "Oh, they've got a singer they're bringing along named Rod Stewart. Send him on." I mean, I drove over the mountains to Albany Airport in my station wagon, picked up the band in my station wagon. Of course, they had a truck with their sound equipment coming too, and drove over the mountains with Rod in the back seat, very quietly drinking cognac, but Ronnie Wood sitting in the front seat with me, being very chatty and voluble and upbeat. And they stayed in a little motel there, and I mean, these guys, it was not the golden age for them financially. They were all just getting started. Little Feat, Pink Floyd, this is a hall with maybe 1,000 people at the most, which is, not...
Pink Floyd played at Williams under you running concerts?
Right. I was pretty up to speed on rock and roll when I got to New York. Most of the rock fans couldn't write, and most of the rock writers, most of the highbrow writers didn't know anything about rock and roll. And fortunately, I was able to do both things. My friend Ron, who had gone to RCA and become David Bowie's product manager at one point, called me up and said, "This magazine called Circus, a heavy metal magazine, needs an assistant editor." They tried me out. They said, "Come in for a week or two, we'll see how you do, write a couple articles for us." And after about 3 weeks, I said to the editor, "When are you guys going to decide whether I've got the job or not?" And he said, "Oh, you've got the job, they're just not paying you yet." So I walked into the publisher and said, "Can I have the salary, please?" And they paid me $150 a week, which in 1974 or whatever it is was okay. The whole writing staff was maybe 3 people. There was the managing editor, who really made the assignments and put everything together, and 2 assistant editors. And then the publisher was the guy who owned the magazine. 6 months later, the editor got fired, so bang, I'm the managing editor of the second biggest rock magazine in the country at age 24. The biggest one obviously was Rolling Stone. We were the second because we had this, I should show you the pictures, because we had the glossy photos, which all the kids liked. You had access to everything. I mean, every record that came out was sent to your apartment for free. Every concert you had tickets to, every press party. I decided whether I wanted to sign something to people like my friend Michael or whether I was just going to go myself. So, for instance, when they said, Led Zeppelin is flying 5 people over, the New York Times, the LA Times, Circus, Cream, and Rolling Stone, I would say, "Oh, I'm going to do the Circus one." They would fly us over, and I'm making $300 a week at this point and living in a little 1-bedroom apartment in the Upper West Side, but they fly us over, put us up at the Ritz, then we're in a Daimler going out to Chiselhurst Caves where the Led Zeppelin's having this torch-lit party and all that stuff. So that was pretty fun stuff. After Circus, when I was freelancing and actually did an article for Cream, I did one of their first interviews with Tom Petty, and they flew me out to LA. I spent the whole afternoon with Tom in the rehearsal studio, talked about, he talked about, shopping for a car, and the way he shops for a car was just, I said, "Which ones did you drive?" He said, "None of them, I just tried out all their stereos." You were supposed to talk about the music, but I was also interested in whatever else was on their mind. And then a day or so later, we were walking through the airport, and everybody said, "Hey, over here," and I turned, and there was Tom sort of waving, and we said hi, and I introduced him. So you could get to know them a little bit. This is the terrible thing, and why I've told all my children, keep a diary of whatever you do, because Later on, my friend Michael had a loft right across the street from CBGB, and we would have all sorts of people would stop by there, and I find sometimes in later years I would call him up and say, Didn't Greg Allman come over one night and we all hung out? What happened that night? Because I can't remember, and I would hope that he remembered. At the time you're in a world like that, you don't know that it's going to be history someday. Richard Williams, the editor, called me up and said, you remember Michael Jackson who was in the Jackson 5? And I said, yeah, I mean, not since I was in college. And he said, well, he's got a solo album coming out. He's 19 now. He's never been interviewed as an adult since he was 13 years old. And would you and Kate Simon, the photographer, who is their photographer, go out to LA and interview him at his house? And I said, sure. That was one of the last rock and roll stories I did, because at a certain point I was approaching 30 years old and didn't want to be writing about 21-year-old millionaires. I decided I wanted to stop covering other people and be the artist myself, or the writer myself. And I wasn't a musician. I wrote a series of mysteries for a couple of years, mystery novels. During the course of that, I was dating an actress, and she said, why don't you write for soap operas? And I said, I don't want to. Said, A, they're not cool, excuse me, and B, I don't want to move to Los Angeles. She said, no, half of them are done here in New York. She said, call the Writers Guild and find out. So I called the Writers Guild and said, how much does a starting soap opera writer make? And they told me, and I dropped the phone. So I watched a couple of soap operas. I said, this dialogue's terrible, I can do this.
And what was the best thing that came out of soap opera writing?
Why, Julia, that would probably be 6 months later, a girl joined the writing team who was pretty attractive, and I said, oh, come sit by me, and I married her and had a Wake Forest student as a result.
And some other ones.
Huh?
There were some other kids in the
other
there.
kids, yeah.
Yeah.
But